to get the color all over that paper. For this experiment or project, we are using the 8x10 paper, but you can cut that in half or you can do quarters, whatever you want. You can make this project your own. All right, so we have that even coverage, and any leftover you have, which if you're using your hands to make it level, then you can just rub on the end. We're gonna add the colors. When you're adding them, you can use one color, you can use two colors, you can use three. I love colors, so we are using all colors. All right, so with your popsicle stick or your toothpick, whatever you use, just go ahead and create your masterpiece. All right, so we have our marbled piece. We're just going to place our paper on top and gently press evenly throughout and make sure that coloring gets evenly spread throughout the piece of paper. You don't want to push down too hard, because when you do that, it will definitely distort this wonderful masterpiece. But you just
All right, we'll call this City Council Workshop Meeting, Budget Discussion Number 2, agenda for August the 21st, 2023 at 6:30 p.m. to order. Next up, roll call and certification of quorum. Madam Secretary, I certify we have a quorum present as all members are present in the chambers, so we appreciate that. Welcome aboard. I got your, you actually cut it a minute ahead of what you said, so that's good. Moving forward, citizens' comments. Were there any comments received? I was going to say, where'd you go? There we go. Thank you for that. We'll move to new business. Number 1, fiscal 2024 budget discussion number 2. And with that, I'll turn it over to Trent.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Council. This is our second workshop for our budget for FY24. And just wanted to start off with, we provided you in your packet last week an answer to many of the questions from budget workshop number 1. And then we have a presentation tonight that'll run through several of those questions. It doesn't touch every one of them. Some of them are just answered in the memo, but if there's any questions over any of those, we can touch on those as well. But we go through many of those throughout the presentation, and then we'll have, much like on the Saturday budget workshop, we'll have points to pause and answer any questions. But we'll follow a similar format with trying to fill in the pieces that we didn't have the last time we met, or with the questions that we got. So just kind of getting things kicked off, our budget theme for this year is realigning for resilience. And realigning being changing to a different position or state, or readjusting or reorienting. We really feel that it's appropriate to kind of take a look at the budget from that standpoint, with what we went through with the tax valuation error last year. And then realigning for resilience, so the capacity to withstand or recover quickly from difficulties. I think we proved that our budgeting practices over the years were very resilient to take we'll go through what we did last year. But it's really imperative that we rebuild that resilience in our budget with this budget and future budgets. And really, we are kind of getting our head back above water with this budget, building that resilience into the budget, some additional capacity in our reserves. But it does not do all the things we want to do yet when it comes to our internal service funds and reinvesting in our infrastructure. So there's a lot of resilience we want to build into the city that we will continue to work towards in the future. But this does get us a long ways back from where we started last year. So we are a city committed to public safety, employees, infrastructure, and the future. I think this budget supports those things. And our staff and leadership are ready, willing, energized, and passionate about moving forward with the strategic priorities that our city council sets for us. And this budget does boost investments in high priority areas based on those strategic priorities, while we continue to take care of those that serve the city. So as I discussed a little bit, tonight's forum, we're going to answer a lot of the questions from the budget discussion number 1. We'll go back through a general overview of the budget assumptions, touch on the compensation and some staffing ratios, which we didn't have in the last presentation. Property taxes, we're going to review our revenues again, including sales taxes, and then charges for services. We have those broken down into much more detail from the last go around. And then in expenses, much like breaking down the charges for services, we've got the transfers out broken down specifically, so you can see where everything's going. And then we'll walk back through these supplementals again. And then for our non-development fee charges, we've got a couple of areas that we'll walk through. Actually, some of them I think are development fees and some are not. But fee changes proposed for this budget. And then there are a couple of other fee things that we've discussed, like with parks. And then there's another one being mandated along the lines of infrastructure fees that we're still working through, that we'll probably have to bring back after this budget process. But we've got a couple of them that'll be part of this budget process that we'll present tonight. Then we'll work through the debt fund, and then the internal service and special revenue funds, a component unit being the PEDC, and then enterprise fund. So again, I want to just for the council and the public, want to frame our 24 budget where we started from and where we've come. Is that we really started with the tax valuation error, the 1.3 billion in error that we dealt with last fall. which before we discovered that error, we set the tax rate and dropped it about 8 cents. Obviously, with the valuation decreasing significantly and the tax rate decreasing significantly, we had a significant hole in our budget, which we had to work through by doing several things, by not putting money into our motor pool for a year, by rearranging some debt, and doing some other one-time type things. So what we really ended up with in the end, after budget amendment number 2 for fiscal year 23, is an operating deficit of just over $7 million. And so to move from that to this budget, we really worked with the departments, and the departments worked really hard to hold their expenditures as flat as possible. So you'll see, our expenditures for FY24 over 23, there's really only a 1.5% increase in those expenditures. This budget did have to absorb a pretty significant cost increase for property insurance. It does restore those motor pool lease payments that we pulled out of the budget last year after discovery of the error. It is a structurally balanced budget, so our revenues are more than our expenditures. And then we do several things to use our existing resources for maximum efficiency. So we looked at some areas where we have a lot of part-time or volunteer type hours, and it's part-time, not volunteer, my mistake, both in the fire department and the parks department, where the departments put together a plan where they feel with full-time employees they can be more effective, they can deliver better service, and it alleviates some of the overtime issues we face. And so we were able to do those really at a zero cost by reducing the pool of hours that we had for the part-time folks that were previously budgeted for. So to me, I look at those as kind of using our existing resources, analyzing those, determining that we can spend those dollars more effectively, and that's what we did in those areas. We wanted to keep our compensation package competitive, so we looked at where what inflation's been doing. We're looking at what our competition for employees, other cities are doing from a compensation package standpoint, and we put together a competitive increase there. And then we focused on the strategic priorities and milestones for any of these supplemental items. So you'll see all of those tied back to the strategic priorities and the milestones. So going into valuing our staff, the last time we did a compensation and classification study, it was implemented over 2 budget cycles. So mostly in the FY22 budget cycle, and then a portion of it was still implemented with the 23 budget. That impact was about $5.5 million to bring everybody up to market rate at that point. Because we had, for several years after the previous comp and class study, we had gone with minimum COLA, about 2% every year, COLA increases, falling behind the market every year. So, the goal moving forward after doing the 22 comp and class is that we analyze the market every year, what's going on in the market as well as inflation, and we make sure we are keeping our compensation package competitive every year so that when we do that next comp and class study, we don't have a $5.5 million number that we're staring at to try to bring our folks up to where they should be, or where we need to be to make sure we are attracting new employees and retaining our existing employees. So what the result of that is, or what's in the budget, is that for FY24, depending on if you're civil service or public service or not, uniformed, we have an effective raise of 5%. That's a 2% market adjustment plus the step plan. And then for everyone else, we've got the 2% market adjustment, and then their step plan is a 2% step plan for the non-uniformed So the other thing we kept in here is that the 60 hours of sick buyback that was in the last year's budget, and then we also adjusted certification pay for civil service, where we'd fallen behind on that in the marketplace as well. So this is our citywide staffing trends. As you can see, almost 50% of our staffing is in the public safety realm, and then that's followed by Public Works, Parks and Rec, and then General Government, and then all other departments. So you can see how we've grown over the years and what is proposed for the '24 budget here. Wanted to touch on number of employees per 1,000 residents. This is a metric that's used. It's not necessarily a great one to compare city to city, although we have in the past, and we can do that again in the future, because cities provide different services. Some cities don't have utilities. Some cities do their solid waste in-house, so you always have to make those adjustments. But wanted to share this, just kind of see where we are year over year, and while we've slowed down in growth, we have been able to add some employees over the last few years to try to catch up for some of the really high growth years where we weren't adding a whole lot of employees. So as you can see, as you are well aware from our staffing plans and our personnel requests from all the departments, we do have needs above and beyond what we are able to fund, but this just gives a little snapshot of where we stand. And we've got that on the next two slides broken down into public safety. So there we are. So public safety, that's been fairly flat. You can see a little bump in 21. I think that's when we opened up one of our fire stations and had a SAFER grant. And then we've been very flat since then. And then the next one is the non-public safety. So fairly flat. And then last year we did add drainage crew, and we brought on the operating team for the surface water treatment plant. So that's kind of why you see a bump there. But other than those major efforts, fairly flat. So with that, that's the introductory stuff. I'm going to hand it over to Rachel Winslow, and she's going to walk us through the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Trent. Good evening. So our big picture general fund recap is that our budget is a balanced budget. It is above the fund policy minimum by $710,000, and we'll have 92 days of reserves. As requested, we broke out the fiscal year 24 taxable value by county, and you can see here Brazoria is the largest component of that, and it does total to $10.8 billion, which is broken out on the next slide. We don't have the taxable value from prior years in an easy located place. We have the assessed value for those years, but we will be keeping it in a manner that we can track going forward. So our proposed property tax rate for fiscal year 24 is 0.6554, and it was established as the maximum possible tax rate on August 14th, 2023. Our proposed property tax rate is a 6% decrease over the last 4 years, but does represent an increase for the current year. Property tax revenue, the state of Texas tax worksheets were provided along with a proposed binder. The general fund O&M rate is an increase, and the debt service tax rate for fiscal year 24 is a slight decrease. The proposed tax rate brings in $55.7 million in revenue, whereas if we went with the no new revenue rate, we would only bring in $38.8 million. A 1 cent reduction in property taxes would be equivalent to about $1 million in the general fund and save a homesteaded homeowner about $36 a year. Our general fund revenues total to $115.2 for the current FY24 proposed budget. You can see the largest increase is in the property tax area, followed by charges for services. Our sales tax revenue has seen growth throughout fiscal year 24 and is a 3.5% increase over the fiscal year 23 amended budget. Sales tax is monitored throughout the year and can be adjusted through the budget amendment process if it continues to trend higher than that. Sales tax revenues are budgeted at $31.6 million for FY24 and represent 27.8% of the general fund revenue. The Pearland Economic Development Corporation also has $15.9 million budgeted, dedicated for uses as defined by state law. Our sales tax growth over the last 5 years is shown here with the current FY23 amended budget and the proposed budget. In recent months, sales tax has been trending downward. Our charges for services, which made up the next large revenue growth category, is primarily made up of the TERS administration fee, which is 65% of that category, and then our fire ambulance services. Our general fund expenditures, we continue to maintain a good credit rating with Fitch and Moody's. We continue to exceed our policy minimum, and this budget maintains our core services as directed to the departments and is structurally balanced. We look at the fiscal year 23 to 24 expenditures. We can see that most of that growth is in public safety and public works, with an additional growth in community services related to some of the supplementals. Our transfers out are broken out here. Our primary transfers out are $8.94 million, and that is to fund things like the water used, our property insurance to the risk management fund, the transfer to the facilities fund, the internal service fund, the drainage maintenance fund, as well as the infrastructure reinvestment fund. All other transfers out are part of the internal service fund repair and maintenance or lease fee program. So this is the transfers out motor pool repair and maintenance by department. The primary driver of that is police and fire, and then you can see it across all funds. So we also have transfers out for repair and maintenance in the drainage maintenance fund, as well as in the enterprise fund and our motor pool and facilities fund. Transfers out for lease fees do come primarily from the general fund, but are matched closely by the enterprise fund, and the drainage fund is also contributing lease fees based off of the vehicles purchased this year. These are just the lease fees assessed for the current fiscal year, and they total $3.3 million. The lease fees do include any new vehicle or replacement vehicle purchases, and that is actually why enterprise fund is so high, because there's about $1 million in vehicle replacements included in that for fiscal year 24. The transfers out for IT operations and maintenance is done based off of software usage and FTE counts, and the largest drivers of that are police and fire, with public works additionally having a large transfer. We see these transfers across all funds that have personnel in them. Our general fund expenditures are primarily driven by staff salaries and wages, and public safety is one of the council's top goals and is also FTE intensive. As we saw earlier, it holds about half of our staff and about 60% of our source of expenditures. All included supplementals in the budget are tied to strategic priority milestones. So the public safety supplementals included in the fiscal year 24 budget include 3 firefighter positions, which are offset by a reduction in part-time hours, a police sergeant with a vehicle, which is offset by a PASD and is fully reimbursable over time, 2 additional police officers with vehicles funded for by the motor pool Broadway allocation to help with staffing needs in police patrol, as well as year 1 of 5 for the replacement of end-of-life police radios, the public safety dispatching study, and the IMT, All Hazards Incident Management course. Engineering and Public Works includes a business process review and update from the Capital Projects Division and is also fully reimbursable from CIP funds. Community service supplementals include the UDC Community Development Update and the 311 Call Center Communications Study. Our parks supplementals include realigning their part-time staff to better meet their needs by funding several part-time full-time positions, 2 full-time lifeguards, 2 full-time head lifeguards, some facility attendant, and a recreation attendant, as well as reevaluating their mowing contract in order to fully fund a 4-person park maintenance crew. The fee changes that are being proposed with the fiscal year 24 budget relate primarily to solid waste and recycling services. These are agreed upon with our contract with Frontier. So these are just some small changes related to the CPI. And then there are 3 new fees proposed this year from the Fire Marshal's office related to annual inspections of child daycare facilities, combustible high pile storage, and commercial cooking inspection.
So that concludes everything in the general fund. So we're ready to discuss and answer any questions on the general fund.
All right, good deal, good report, good update. So we'll turn it over to council for questions, comments. Anybody want to lead off? Ms. Kate?
I have a question. On page 6 of the memo, this is for Trent or Rachel, either one. On page 6 of the memo from you, Trent, is that, those are now I've lost the page, I'm sorry. There it is. It's right there. Well, the values, it says 1.9 billion, 12.5 billion, and 761 million. Is that about? There it is. It's number 8.
Number 8, yes.
Is that the same thing as on page 16 as the slides? It's just those are certified now?
So these, I believe,
Right.
are the actual assessed value. And then you have to go through all the calculations to get to your taxable value.
Gotcha.
And our taxable value is what we see, you know, the tax rate applied to see our revenues.
So on this, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
So you can see that you know, the assessed values are much higher, but then once you apply all the homestead exemptions, you apply, you know, all the other exemptions that are available, then you wind up at what you see here, which is the taxable value. And so, you know, we've gotten these broken down by county so that we can start tracking those. You know, we can go back and look at the assessed value by county year over year from the past. And one of the things that Rachel mentioned, that on the taxable value, it's harder to pull that information without going back through all the information provided by the 3 counties each year, because it's not part of the kind of top level numbers they give you. It's got to be worked through as you go through the worksheet. So, you know, we're working to see how we can make sure we're trending, that those are trending properly. But we can look at the tax assessment or the assessed value and trend those by county.
I guess the reason I'm asking is because the numbers for Harris County and Brazoria County are so different, and then the number for Fort Bend is just $1 million different.
So Fort Bend provided us certified estimates at this point.
I think they give you a certified already, Fort Bend. The other 2 are certified estimates.
Yeah, Fort Bend gave us certified, and the other 2 were certified estimates. So I don't know if in the certified that cleans up, once you have that, does that clean up all the changes in the values and everything? Is that why that one's close, or is it just that Fort Bend's so much smaller, you don't see that much fluctuation in it? Yeah, so between having the certified versus the certified estimate, and then Fort Bend just being a smaller amount in its entirety, there's just a smaller difference between the 2.
Brazoria County is like $4 billion different. And then if you look at slide 17,
So let me ask on that.
I really am.
Let me ask real quick on that. Does this taxable value by county here, Trent, does this number have the TERS in it, or is it separate?
Yes, so that full number would have the TERS in it as well. Yes, sir.
So then on page 17.
Yeah, that's what I want to look at on slide 17, because if you look, our number, look at that huge 9.4 in 22-23, and then all the way to 10.8 in 23-24. It's, if you look back over the years, this is a really big jump. So I'm just concerned that, not concerned, maybe concerned.
Well, and again, based on 17, it's showing 10.8 city taxable roll, net TERS, and then TERS number 2 in dark blue 3.9. So that's why I go back to the other slide. I've interpreted that as the TERS is not in that slide, because the total was 10 something. Right there, 10.8.
Number page 16, you mean?
Yeah, page 6, the one before it.
So on slide 16, you're saying that the TERS is not in the Brazoria County numbers, is what you think?
That's correct.
And the reason is the way it's not how the TERS is taxed, it's how the money flows. So it comes in as an administrative payment as opposed to quote unquote property taxes. So it's how it's treated and how the dollars come in, even though yes, it's tied to a value and it's tied to a property tax. It's how we get it, which is why we have to watch that when the TERS ends and how that comes on the actual tax roll. We have to be very careful how that happens, because it all comes in as an administrative payment now. That's why you saw there's another slide in here talking about the administrative payment of some $14-15 million.
So on page 6 of the memo, you're saying that one does have the TERS. That's why those numbers are so much bigger?
If you
Right.
add up those numbers, it would be closer to that $14 million.
Even though the Fort Bend number is higher on page 16. But then, anyway, just seeing all that and then seeing on slide 17 the way it's the biggest jump we've ever had, it just got me thinking weird.
Sure. So go to that other slide. Yeah. So that 9.4 to 10.8, that's about a 14.8% increase. And, you know, that is consistent with the numbers we initially saw from the county. They were actually all the preliminary numbers were quite a bit. I think they were around 18%.
Yeah, 9.4.
And so, you know, we've been very diligent to go through these and make sure, you know, we haven't missed anything and that the numbers are accurate. But the numbers for, you know, the raw numbers for Brazoria County are up significantly. So, yeah, the 12.5 versus last year's.
But Brazoria County is a certified estimate, right? It's
It
not
is.
an actual certified number.
Right, it's a certified estimate, but there's adjustments in there for when it is a certified estimate. Working with the tax assessor collector, they basically provide an estimate for the property still under protest, and then their recommendation and how they've handled it in the past for certified estimates is they use about 90% of that. So that's what we plugged into the worksheet. So.
So the number on 16 is net the TERS, and the blue section, the 10.8, is also net the TERS. You add those two.
Correct.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Okay, thank you, Trent.
Yes, thank you.
And I'm sorry. I see where you're saying on this slide where you go from 2022 to 2023 and the jump. That's your concern from 9.4. And I'll tell you, majority of that is probably coming from commercial reappraisal. This year, I think most of you can probably agree who own commercial properties. Brazoria County has been very aggressive. Hope your mic was off. And so I'll tell you that's where the jump is. I mean, I can see your concern, but I can tell you, I can also attest values have just skyrocketed this year. And that's where majority of that increase is probably coming from.
But after last year, I want to ask questions.
Absolutely.
I'm not insinuating anything. I just thought
No,
I should ask questions.
You should, and I completely get it. We asked ourselves the questions many times going through this and making sure we had the right numbers from the right places, and we didn't have anything like last year.
Ms. Kate, I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
Questions, comments?
Well, I guess
Barry?
my question is that, you know, if we take, you know, the 10.8 million, which is what we anticipate our property tax values to be, you know, and we multiply it times the 0.665 or 655 rate, You know, I'm not coming up with that number. The proposed tax rate, you're saying 40 million plus 15 million for the TERS will give us a $55.7 million number.
So what we show in the green column here is that the general fund property tax revenues is 40 million, and then the TERS administration fee is 15.7. The way the TERS administration fee works is that the tax rate is applied to the value in the TERS, and then that money goes to the TERS based on that tax rate. And then the city gets back in an administrative fee. It starts at 64% of that. But if our tax rate is under about 70.5 cents, then the 64% we get back in the TERS administration fee starts to go down. So we're down well below the 70.5. We're at 65.5. And so the actual administration fee we get back is right around 60 or 61%. So you could apply the number and multiply it by about 61%, and that should be right around the ballpark of what we're showing, the 15.7 for the TERS administration fee. And I'm sorry, this is only the general fund operating side, the 40 million right there.
Yeah,
That's the other anomaly in dealing with the TERS and the TERS administration fee is the tax rate, the full tax rate, the operating fund or operating tax rate and the debt service tax rate is applied to the TERS value. And then all of that money goes to the TERS. When it comes back into our budget, it all comes back into the general fund as a TERS administration fee. So none of that really goes into the debt service.
And
It's complicated.
I would, the benefit is having worked around one, the value in the TERS is just segregated. The dollars immediately go to another place, and then we get a portion. And so the value, the tax rate is levied, but it's just what we get is not a one-to-one like we would on another piece of value on 35. So
Correct.
you have to look at it as it goes into a completely different bucket, and then we get a portion of what's in that bucket.
Yep.
That's correct.
It's how it's applied, it's how it comes in, which is why as we approach 2029 and 30, we have to be very, very careful how that comes, quote unquote, fully on the roll. Yeah. Any other questions, comments? Yes, Mr. Cam Carr.
Great. I'm trying to be more user friendly here. Do you want me to ask more individual items, or you want me to ask more high level items? Whatever works for you.
Are you going to ask all of them and we start with one? And go to the other?
They're all general fund. I don't think we're
Okay.
gonna get.
No, I think now we stick with general fund, so
Okay.
we'll get into the other
Can I
funds.
go to my supplemental item here?
You got that?
This is in the back of this package for those on TV or at home or whatever, but I just want to confirm, so the 114,257, that's the projected expenditure in this budget as proposed?
As it was originally proposed, but we've reduced it down to. I think-
14033, but if people are looking in documents, it's
Correct.
14.2. Okay. That, Trent, is that the highest number we've ever done in the city of Pearland?
We're a growing city, so it has gone up every year by looking at the chart here. So yes.
All right. I just want to get that. And then are we proposing budget at or above the no new rate?
We're proposing a tax rate above the no new rate.
How many pennies are we above the no new rate?
Oh, we have that easily available. So the no new rate is at 55 and some change, and we're proposing a rate at 65 and a half,
10 pennies above the no new rate?
approximately.
Can we go to page 13 now? Yeah, I'm more user friendly. I didn't give you a million things on that. Revenues and expenditures, we're up $10 million, roughly speaking, approximately speaking. It's like 9.1, but we've got some extra hundreds of thousands. Most of that is driven by property tax, is that correct?
So which you said we're up on
revenues.
Up on revenues? Yeah, most of that's property tax and the TERS administration fee.
Got it. Okay. Then on the expenditure side, I hear that we are 1.5%. We are 1.5% on the amended budget as it was proposed and adopted last year. It's about, let me see here, I have this. I had to go dig through last year's book. 110.2 as adopted, 3.6% as opposed to last year. So I just want to put that out there. What that kind of said, it's higher. Okay. Can we go to slide 29? And so on this item, 1.2 to 6 or 114, and as was, I think for notations purposes, I think it would be helpful when we put something here, just because what we have published on the website with the books is a little bit different. And as you know, we have some very critical folks in the community who are very, very eagle eye on this. And I think, you know, we need to at least just notate that somewhere. It was because of that lawn maintenance contract, we moved around the 200,000. And so that would just be helpful for that purpose. And can we go to the slide? I missed it on the IT transfers. I didn't get the notation on that, but we had a really, really good graphic that was really helpful. There we go, the one that had the chart.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is seared into my mind because we had the IT workshop about a month and a half ago, and I think Member Carbone, with his years of experience, cut right to the chase on that, and it made a gigantic impact on me. That I think our budget for the year is somewhere around $1 million or $2 million. Do you remember, Tony, what that amount was? Okay, $2 million. His accountant, and this year it's 5.3. How do we, in this budget, how do we pull this back together? Because I remember when we had that discussion during the budget, or the workshop, sorry, that the proposed amount was close to 5 or 6 million. And then I think when Member Carbone looked, our budget for the year, at least in the previous budget, not this budget, was somewhere sub 2 million. And so we've now got a number.
We're talking about the IT
Correct.
expenditures. I think our IT expenditures will probably be from the previous year somewhere a little bit less than this. I don't know exactly how much less, but somewhere in this ballpark. That's our operation and maintenance costs. That's our software. That's our regular replacement of things. That's our subscription fees and all those things. In that IT 5-year strategic plan, that additional number was looking at making sure, was adding personnel, and it was looking at the software replacements, the major software replacements, the major server the major switch, the major IT infrastructure replacements that we need to make over the next several years, which we have a little bit of in this budget. We've got about is it half or a third of the switches that need to be replaced in this budget. So, you know, this reflects a little bit more, I don't know exactly how much more, but something similar to what we've had in the past handful of years for the IT budget. The IT budget wasn't $2 million last year.
Let me ask
to
this.
summarize.
Is this forced savings that we're doing, like we're doing for the motor pool?
Okay, so all of our internal service funds have two components. They have the operating component, which is our personnel. It's our, I'll do the motor pool because it's the easiest one. It's the personnel, it's the oil and the gas and the repairs and maintenance of the vehicles. And that's one component of the motor pool. The other component of the motor pool is where we charge ourselves lease fees to save up the dollars over the life of that vehicle. So at the end of that life of that vehicle, we've got the money ready to replace that vehicle. The IT is basically, will operate the same way. But as of right now, the only thing we've put in that fund is the operating cost. We have not started building that savings account to replace major software systems and servers and switches and the very high dollar cost items.
Let me ask this question differently now. You've answered what I was looking for. In the motor pool and some of the other ones, are we starting to go into savings mode in those other funds as opposed to IT? We're not in savings mode yet. The other
So
ones.
motor pool, we are. Remember last year we skipped our lease payments. They're back in the budget this year. That's one reason our expenditures have gone up. And then in the facilities internal service fund, it's much like the IT internal service fund. We've moved all the operating expenses over there, but just where we are budget-wise, we have not started saving up so we're prepared to replace a roof when it needs to happen, or we're prepared to replace a HVAC system.
So the 2.6 here is not the forced savings like we're doing in motor pool.
That's just annual operating cost of keeping the lights on and doing the normal maintenance and our personnel that do that and the contracts we have to do that.
All right, I'm about to wrap up.
And that's just the general fund piece of it.
Good question.
Can we go to page 13 real quick? Again, it was one that had the revenues expenditures. By the way, compliments on the deck. Very, very straightforward deck. Thank you. I'm just going to make this point. I'm not going to belabor it. I'm just going to say it because I would like to say it. I think it needs to be said. We are increasing the budget. We are above the no new rate by, let's call it plus or minus a dime. That means we are collecting more dollars from the citizenry than we did the year before. We are not doing anything on homestead exemption. We are still at 2.5%. Our erstwhile friends in Alvin are now at 20%. Friends in League City, I believe, are at 20% or close to that. Friends in Friendswood are there. We are finding money to spend. Maybe that's warranted, but we are still not putting the taxpayer, at least the homeowner, first. My opinion. I saw the video. Wasn't here when we had that discussion. It was a 1-6 discussion if I would have been there. But we need to start finding that priority there. It's important to pay for fire trucks. It's important to pay for police vehicles. It's important to pay for switches. I truly believe that. I understand that. But the taxpayer cannot be taxed out of their home. I'm not saying that we're doing that today, but we also have to calculate here a water increase. There's a mid-teens water increase, and there will be for the next 5 years. That's just the math of it. That's what's been presented. I'm not making that up. There's a whole litany of files and internet videos that say that. But I would like to see us have that discussion. I don't know if that's going to happen or go very far beyond this, but I just want to say my piece on that.
So I think we're scheduling another discussion on the homestead exemption in October.
It's that first meeting in October, right?
I think we said second meeting, unless you want to do it while I'm not here. So.
Oh, well, just stay tuned on the second meeting in October.
Yeah.
We'll have a great conversation.
So the plan is, at the time we discussed that this past year, we were in the midst of trying to figure out, where we were going to be with our tax valuation situation. We were kind of up against the deadline for whether that would be adopted this year. There was a lot of different things going on with the legislature at the time. So with all that uncertainty, I believe, the council chose to, let's take a look at this down the road.
And I want to,
That next chance would be then. And then just to address real quick, the expenditures, I just want to, make sure we point out, looking at the year over year like you provided, is that we, the last 2 years we have dealt with significant inflation for materials, supplies, and equipment. We are absorbing a significant increase in our property insurance rates into this budget. And then we're restoring that motor pool lease payment, $1.6 million, I believe. And then, of course, keeping our compensation package competitive. And I think, one of the other things that looking in the chart is when you, if you look back a couple of years ago, we had a SAFER grant when we opened our last fire station. When that grant fell off, we had to absorb those costs into that operating budget as well, much like on the, and we did the same thing for the drainage crews. We absorbed that as well. And we're absorbing 100% of that, in this 24 budget. We only absorbed a portion of that last year. And much like we will on the enterprise fund budget for operating a surface water plant. So there are, legitimate pieces that are making up those additional dollars, whereas all of our day-to-day operating budgets that the departments work with remain very, very flat.
Sure. And Mr. City Manager, I want to compliment you. I said my piece. I feel like I've gotten a lot of that out. You guys are doing a lot of hard, heavy lifting. The last city manager did you no favors, and you were digging out of a gigantic hole. And so I just want to give credit. The team has worked exceedingly hard, and we're spending on necessities. There's not a whole lot of wants in here, and so I have to give credit where it's due. But at some point, I'm gonna start transitioning from we're cleaning up the mess to we're doing better things. But we can't have you be the custodian if we don't give you a mop and a pan and a brush to go clean up the mess that was made. And that wasn't your fault. And I appreciate all the hard work you guys have done on that. I think it's, I have more confidence in this presentation than I had in last year's budget. So it's a gigantic kudos to the team. So thank you guys.
Yeah, and I am glad that we will follow up with the homestead exemption in October. I just want to remind everybody and for the public, I asked the council to bring that up at the strategic planning workshop, and it wasn't brought up. So it's one of the reasons why it kind of languished until, we got into June. And of course, we were really up against the clock because you have to make that decision by the end of June so the appraisal districts can know. So again, I'm glad that we have some dates, and, city manager said we're going to do it in October, and we will. So, but again, I just want to remind folks, we had the same discussion last year in the middle of the budget, and I asked, bring it up during the strategic planning retreat. There was no, it wasn't brought up. So it wasn't a priority that day, but it became a priority come June. So good stuff. Next questions, comments?
Yep.
Mr. Carbone?
Thank you, Mayor. Back to Councilmember Cade's question on memo number 8, where it has the, or item number 8 on the memo, where it has the assessed value by county. Can we see that over time? I think assessed is easy to get a hold of. Taxable is a little bit more. So if we can see whatever history you have available, 3-5 years. And if you go to slide number 7, so I see this, I get this. If I rewind back to 2020 and prior, when you mentioned we're doing 2% COLAs and that got us behind, we still had, or did we have civil service steps in place back then?
We did. So we were doing a COLA and a step for the uniform public. Let me back up. We had a step plan, I believe, for PD only at the time. Is that? Yeah, PD only. So PD was getting the 2% COLA and their 3% step. Everyone else, fire department, everyone else, I believe, was just getting the 2% COLA and nothing else.
Okay. So the difference now is everybody's on a step. And so we're saying here, we're not calling it a COLA, we're calling it a market adjustment. But
yes, sir.
I mean, if I recall, I think PD still fell behind back during those times as well as part of that $5.5 million catch up.
Yep.
So,
They did, and so one of the things we're looking to do this year is not a full-blown compensation and classification study, but a compensation analysis. You know, basically same cities we've used in the past. Look at that, make sure we're not falling behind in the interim. So we know that going into next year's budget. So that'll be looked at, and you know, from what I've seen for our area, we had a city managers group that, you know, we share what's going on in our cities, and everyone shared what they were proposing in their budget. And I would say with both, you know, public, our civil service as well as everyone else, we were right there where everyone else was, maybe somewhere between 1.25% behind the average. But you know, it's cities of all different sizes, and so you kind of have to.
okay. I don't know that, I mean, clearly we can't afford to do anything this year, but I think seeing that data sooner rather than later, because I got a funny feeling that we're doing the best we can, but we're still going to have this big delta. I mean,
From the numbers we've looked
Try
at
not to
recently,
wait for
we're in
5-year
we're in
catch-up.
pretty
Right.
good shape right now. We're in pretty good shape, but we do need to be vigilant and make sure what we are, you know, what we did last year, what we're doing this year,
Yeah.
is keeping us there. And if it's not,
I mean, if we are in
correct
good shape,
course.
then let's
Yeah.
stop. I'm not advocating overpaying. I'm just saying we expect the best.
we want to make sure, and we want to correct course earlier than waiting for
Yeah.
5 years and then have, you know, a big correction.
Member Carbone, can I ask real quick? In the memo, though, it also said previously, I guess, that we didn't account for, I guess, time with the city at that point. Is that maybe not an issue anymore, or is that potentially an issue this go around as well?
That should be what the STEP's doing.
Sure. So I
Yeah.
think that was kind of centered around, you know, how we'd bring people into the organization. And so it didn't account for past experience when we brought them in the organization. So a lot of times we were bringing people in probably lower than they should have been based on their experience. And then because it was limited how much you'd go up every year, you were just kind of stuck there. And so with the step plans we've implemented, there's a more rigid way to evaluate. I shouldn't say rigid. It's a more, I guess, formulaic way we evaluate. Somebody comes into the organization and they've got this much experience, then we can move them into this step. And there's a limit, you know, that we limit for the departments to make those decisions. And if somebody comes in with a lot of experience and it's beyond that limit, then it comes through our office to evaluate if it makes sense or not for that particular individual. But you know, for the most part, when we bring people in with experience, you want to pay them what they're worth. That's experience, so that you've got them here for the long term.
I think what we didn't account for before that you might be bringing up is our topped-out employees as well. I know that previous to last year's budget, if you were topped out in the police department, you got whatever the market adjustment or the COLA was. You didn't get that and the 3% step, which that negatively impacted about a third of the employees. Last year and this year, those topped out employees are getting a lump sum on top of what the market adjustment is.
Real quick. Member Barry?
Just beg your forgiveness here for a moment, but can you walk me through this calculation on the actual general fund? It's not working for me. So at 10.8 million, 849, 109, 510 or whatever, the slot on page 20. And, you know, at the 322.5 rate, I'm looking at about 35 million plus the TERS rate at 15.7. So is that, it doesn't take much. It's like three numbers, right? So I mean,
I'm sorry. I was trying to see if Rachel had something we could show or not.
okay.
So you're looking to take the
no, I was looking at
basically the valuation, the 10.8,
yeah,
apply the tax rate.
apply the general fund O&M tax rate to it, right? And that should give me my 40 plus the TERS. I mean, it's been bothering me for a few days.
Give me 1 minute. Okay. Can you bring it up?
If you want to get
Okay, so,
yeah, if you want to get
all right.
it's fine.
So there's a missing piece in that straight number. And that missing piece is the tax ceiling, the frozen tax ceilings. So, there's another chunk of properties that they don't let you put in this calculation. That's the frozen tax values. And but we do generate revenues off those frozen tax values. So that's the one where.
For 65 and older.
So that's 65 and older and disabled.
Disabled veterans.
Plus my house and-
So yeah, there's a couple of them that fall in that category. And so when we're building the budget, you've got the revenues off the tax rate for the taxable value. I think that's somewhere in the $35 million range. And then you
Yeah.
take all of the frozen value ones and we apply the tax rate to that as well, but then we discount those. And are those the ones we discounted to 90%? 72.5. So based on the past years, we discount those to 72.5%, because
Was that an
That's-
annual number? That's like a fixed number?
that's a number that we base on trends from past years. And I think we've adjusted that over the years based on, how that number changes over time.
All right, so I haven't gone so far as to lose sleep over it, but it has been bothering me for a few
And
days.
and then we apply our normal.
So I think we've got up in
Just
front of
didn't
you
see that
now.
number anywhere, so.
Yeah, so if you take a look in front of you now, you see the
Collection
general
rate.
fund, you got the 35 million, so that's the tax rate applied to the 10.8 billion. And then the tax levy of frozen properties is 4.7, and that's what makes up your 40 million, 39 point.
Did I miss that in here somewhere?
The frozen's not in that.
I know it's here, but I'm just,
Yeah.
okay, all right,
It's in the
no,
number, but it's not listed in the.
I got you.
Yeah.
I appreciate you guys, thanks.
Yeah. Or Camcar?
We'll get there eventually.
Thank you, sir. I wanted to piggyback off Member Carbone's comments. I think we've worked real hard to catch up and get somewhere regular, and we need to keep going. But I would appreciate if we put some kind of either policy or ordinance that we need to do a mandatory look once every 24 or 36 months, somewhere that just, we know it's going to happen so many times a decade, and just plan for that. I think it'll make it easier.
Yep.
And I wouldn't mind seeing that as just something that's a healthy thing that we do, like we would do for other items that we're checking. And so I would be willing to entertain it after the budget season.
Yeah, I think it's real simple. I think we look at it annually. Not any more than that, but I think we look at it annually. We look at it as a part of our budget.
And there is information out there that we use annually. There's a TML salary survey. There's other resources that we can look at annually. But I think to have somebody go do it and do it more in depth for us, we want to do that probably every 2 to 3 years.
That's what I'm.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Just as kind of a check in the interim before you do another full-blown class and comp study.
And,
And that's what we have planned for this year. Correct, Lorraine? I don't see Lorraine. Lorraine does, Ron, she's got that plan for this year, right?
Yes, sir, I believe so.
we'll do it during the year. We'll have it maybe by this time next year. If not, we'll kick in. A couple things. I on the employees per thousand, I know it's not the best. I know it's not the best look to be able to look, because we had this discussion with the Pasadena chief when he was in here that, comparing us to all the other cities, there is not a true apples to apples comparison. But what I like about the way we did do it, it's having that conversation when people say, well, we just have too many employees, and you ask compared to what? And you start looking at just municipal government in general. I can have that conversation with the resident, and having where we fall in that is good for me, just because, like I said, I can have that conversation and then say, okay, here's where we are, and then let me expound on that. We have a full-time fire department. A, B, and C city do not. So if you go and look at that, you see where their numbers would be if they had full-time. And you can just kind of have and talk about the differences between the cities. And people do get, they go, okay, wait a minute, I didn't know there was, I just thought city government, and all those kind of things. And so it kind of helps explain it when you do have that one-on-one time with people. So I'd like to see it, and it doesn't have to be before the budget season's over. We got enough to do with the budget, but if we've got that, it's just good to have in the back pocket. And before we move on, is there anybody taping the Little League World Series in Needville that does not want the score? It's 3-1 Texas over California in the third right now, or the fifth? Fifth, top of the fifth. So I'll give you a score update in the middle of the budget workshop. Remember Hernandez.
Thank you, sir. Last time I did fire, then police. This time I'll do police, then fire. So Chief Spires, you're up. The 1.35 per 1,000 citizens, so piggybacking off of what the mayor's comments were, being the lowest it's ever been. I know last time Chief Taylor brought up that they're working on their ratio, and maybe you didn't have that number. Did you do, I guess, do you have an ideal ratio in mind, or is that still something that's
So
on
an
the
ideal
horizon?
ratio, the FBI standards are anywhere between 1.8 and about 2.3, 2.4. And actually that 1.35 is really not accurate for us because we have 11 SROs.
Mm-hmm.
Those SROs don't really do us any good as far as fighting crime in the city. They're at the schools where they need to be.
Right.
During the summer, they're taking their vacation, their training, so we don't get much use out of them with the summer. Excuse me. So if you take those out, we're really at 1.27.
So if we were to go up to 1.8, what would that look like number-wise?
About 56.
Wow. Okay. Trent, do we have a roadmap on?
It's a very long road.
Yeah. Wow.
Sorry, Chief.
All right. So I will not ask if you're happy then with your allocation of officers this year.
I'm happy with any allocation I can get.
Wow. All right. Well, I'd like to, I guess maybe we've said about a dozen times tonight that public safety is, well, Rachel said public safety is a priority, and you said public safety is a priority. And I do agree, and I think it's no secret that I'm not a fan of all the cameras and drones and stuff, but I am a fan of actual, boots on the ground police officers.
Sure.
I think that they do a lot more than a camera or a drone ever could, especially building goodwill in the community.
So we do need those things, the cameras and any technology we can get.
Oh, I absolutely agree.
But that's reactive. Those things are
absolutely.
reactive. And
I'm just saying that I would more prefer to prioritize actual police officers who are out building goodwill and relationships in the community. So I would definitely like to see that as something that we try to close that gap from here to the next budget. And then, so Chief Taylor, got a question on your proposed fees here. One of them in particular is just kind of a what is it, and then the other one is a can it be done privately. But the high stack, whatever combustible, I don't know, wherever it is, the high combustible fee.
They're getting it on.
There we go.
There you go.
High pile storage.
Combustible high pile storage.
Yeah, there we go. Where is that applicable?
That's applicable at your home goods stores, your big box stores where we get our home goods that have high stacked materials back in the warehouse, so to speak, or any warehouses in the city that we have, so that we can keep that at a safe level, so that we know when we have the high stacks that they also have correct, fire suppression and the things that we need to have to protect those areas, so that we don't grow it into a larger fire in those areas. So when we have high stacks, a lot of times that leads to, if you do have sprinkler heads, those being blocked, things not being maintained properly, and that's part of that process to make sure a high stack is done properly and that we're aware of it, for one thing, and two, monitoring that on a regular basis.
Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
The second question is on the commercial cooking inspection. Is that not something that can be done through a third party? I know there are the fire suppression inspection companies kind of all over that. Can we just force them to do it third party and?
They do a third-party inspection. As far as they have someone come by they're contracted with, that they do the annual maintenance on those systems.
Right.
But it is inspected by our fire marshal's office to make sure that that stuff, those maintenance procedures are followed to the letter of the ordinance, to make sure that those are done properly in a timely manner.
So can you just, very high level, what is the difference between our inspection and the inspection and it's done, I guess, with the maintenance?
Their inspection goes along with maintenance so that they come by and do an official inspection to make sure that the equipment is properly maintained and works properly. They actually they falsify a fire, a simulated fire. They'll make sure that equipment works properly. They document that. They tag it. They're tagged within a certain date. Those dates are good for a year. And within that time frame, our fire marshal's office will come by and make sure that those have been inspected properly and that they're tagged properly, to make sure that they're following those steps, those procedures. And that's part of also the compliance mechanism that goes with our health and wellness resource on the code enforcement side, to make sure that our restaurants stay compliant so that they stay within the letter grades that we hope to them to maintain, so that they achieve a high level for our residents.
And Member Hernandez, when you fall outside of what the norms are, they also repair what needs to be repaired.
Yeah, I'm just saying, so we're inspecting the inspection, ensuring that was done and that they have a tag hanging and things
Yes.
like that. But we're not actually testing the system then. We're not triggering the...
We will in some cases. If there's a problem, there has been a system activated, we will have those processes. If we have a fire suppression system, sprinkler system, let's say in a warehouse that we were talking about, so we may go out on a routine inspection, or if there is a scope of work done where there's enough work done on that suppression system, that our FMO, our fire marshal officers, will go out and actually they will activate that system and make sure it works appropriately. There are times when that happens. It just depends on the situation.
Because you're already conducting kind of just regular annual inspections, correct? I mean, you're doing follow-up. So I guess this is something that's above and beyond that why we're...
It is.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. I'm a little apprehensive about this one, Mayor, only because to Member Kamkar's point, we do have this big water rate increase coming up, and commercial kitchens use a lot of water, and this is going to be more of a hit to them. So I don't know. This one I'm a little weary on.
So just these three fees, kind of to give you the thought process behind proposing these. Last year there were several fees proposed for the fire department or fire marshal on a lot of different inspections. And so we asked them to go through them and say, okay, which of these occur when you're already on site for something else, like a final or anything like that. And any of those, we said, okay, you're already there. Let's not put a new fee in place. And then we said, and which ones, are they all required by the code to do these things on with these an annual basis? And so those were the ones that we did propose this year, and we stripped the other ones out from last year.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. The child daycare facility, those are required by the state of Texas annually. So again, they know that they have to have that fee. Without it, I'm not sure how many child daycare facilities we have that this would apply to, but my guess is probably 100 in that range. I don't know. It doesn't really apply to the schools in that they have their own stuff, but we're talking about with daycare licensing and that type of thing. So the property taxpayers are supplementing and paying for that if we don't charge the fee. That's the only difference that I have. And on the high pile storage, Chief, do you anticipate how many roughly that would be?
I do not. I can get that information for you.
Because I know from a big box standpoint and I would imagine that would be, like the Walmarts of the world, and then you've got the Lowe's and Home Depots, those big boxes, as well as, anything that you might have in the grocery stores, the town center, and then of course the industrial spaces that we have. So fair to say that it's probably less than 100 total. May or may not be, but it might be, close to that. So again, I think we need to be careful. Those need to be done, and us, the taxpayer, are paying for that if not. But also, we've got 1.5 million square feet of industrial and combined storage, in some phase of permitting out in the Lower Kirby area. So we're going to have more and more of that.
Yeah, the first two I don't really have
coming
much
in.
consternation
Yeah.
on. It's the third one really that
Yeah.
I had one question on the unusual residential garbage accumulation service. What is that service? And then the disposal fee and behind it. What is the service? Like hoarding?
So I believe that is if somebody has something that's outside of the your regular residential, garbage or heavy trash or, brush and leaves and stuff like that. If it's something outside of that, then there's, an opportunity to pay the cost there for disposal of those things. I can't give you a good example of what it is, but it would be outside of any of the normal things that they're required to pick up.
Yeah, and they have on their app, it's a cubic yard amount. So if you, for example, have an additional trash cart amount that's setting beside your trash cart and you need to have it picked up, that's a pretty minor charge. I want to say it's like less than $1. I mean, you schedule it, it's like less than $1 to have them picked up. I think this is really, somebody empties their whole house and wants to get it.
But the $2.55 per hour is just for someone to come help you get it?
No, that is for Frontier to haul it off.
Gotcha.
Accumulate it, pick it up, and because usually they'll have a regular truck, not their arm. This isn't in trash bins. This is, a driver and 2 men and a truck, that's picking it up and hauling it.
And I can add that it's. I think this is pretty much in line with what it would cost if you had a private hauler come out and remove it from you. If you had the 1-800 junk, or I don't know who does it anymore, but that's kind of what that is. And then people doing renovations, or if they got a bunch of yard work, things like that, and they're just a large accumulation.
I'm sorry, it said utilities. I thought this was like city.
Yeah, well, it all falls under our utilities and our enterprise fund. So, last question, Mr.
Just
Camp.
very quickly, do we have with this new fee change, do we have a projection on how much additional funds are coming to the city?
Do we run that?
We didn't run the full calculations out, but there's estimated to be about 65 daycares that will be inspected and about 30 commercial cooking inspections a year. Well, it will be more than that, but 30 additional cooking inspections a year. So we don't have the full revenue projection, but it is not projected to be a large amount of revenue.
And on the solid waste and recycling side, do we have that?
No, because we already charged those fees, and this was part of our contract with Frontier Waste.
This is a contractually obligated increase.
It's the CPI.
That's correct. So our contract, there's a CPI that increases as that goes up.
Can we just notate that for future items? That'd be great.
Mr. Berry, let's move on to debt after this.
Okay. All right. Honestly, Chief, when it comes to these inspections, I'm not necessarily in favor of adding additional dollars to businesses in Pearland at all. But I know for a fact that child daycare facilities are inspected randomly throughout their lifetime because of their licensing and whatnot. Commercial cooking is required from an insurance standpoint. They're required to maintain that on an annual 6-month basis, to have inspections associated with that. So they're already paying for those inspections annually or twice a year. And as far as for the high pile storage, I couldn't even imagine a big box store, whatever. I mean, I'm sure there's something out there that would fall into that category, but I can't necessarily wrap my head around it for a business that wouldn't otherwise have, you know, clean store requirements and things of that sort. So I think that would probably be the only one I would even consider as far as the fees go. You know, I think now is just bad timing to add additional fees, and but I do understand the need from your perspective. It's hours and it's time spent for you guys going out there and doing that inspection.
And being required inspections, do you put that cost on the people being inspected, or do we put that cost on everyone else? I think that's why they're proposed as potential fees.
And these are state required inspections. I mean, I've already gotten I can't tell you how many calls I got about these backflow preventers, you know? So
Chief,
not a huge fan of that, and
code, or
if we can ignore it, I'm happy to do so.
Call TCEQ on the unfunded mandate.
as far as fire code requirements?
Well, that's exactly
Our fire
right.
code requirements, they are required annually. If we have to go out and do extra work at these restaurants, if they add equipment, if they change equipment, if there's any issues there with that equipment, we go out and do subsidiary tests with that. And when that occurs, instead of charging all the taxpayers, you focus on that business when they have one issue at that business. So that's the thought process behind these and these needs, that it's common practice, best practice with a lot of cities that we check with, and in my experience, we do that. So that's the reason why we've asked for that.
I get it. I totally understand it. And I would assume that, you know, if someone's going to change out an Ansel system in a restaurant, they're going to have that inspected. Once that gets, you know, they're going to have to be able to do it to get their permit, right? So, so that actual inspection happens at that time. But again, I don't necessarily know that we want to burden our businesses with that, and it's not necessarily a huge overhead cost. It's just the idea of saying, okay, here's another expense I have to write a check for, or something like that. So, just on its face, you know, and I understand the need. I would not necessarily be in favor of these fees, but I mean, I'm just one vote. Sorry, Chief.
Well,
Appreciate
you're one
it.
plus
Thank you.
one, so.
Let's do it, Barry. Let's do it.
You in favor of paying my permit fees?
I'm in favor of commerce.
So you're in favor of new businesses not paying permit fees, but all of our property tax owners pay their permits.
I am refreshed that Member Barry is expressing concerns about business and the burdens on business.
We'll see if you have that same when we get around to the homestead exemption.
Okay,
We're going to
that's
move on
all,
to
man.
debt.
All right, back to you, Rachel.
Okay, our tax-backed debt fund or debt service fund is where the city budgets all of the revenue and expenditures for all of the tax-based debt. Expenditures in the system or fund, pay for non-enterprise system debt and MUD rebates. Our tax rate has two components, the O&M and the debt service component, and this is the revenue generated from the debt service property tax component. Our fiscal year 24 proposed debt service rate is 33 cents, and it is estimated to bring in 34.9 million. The total tax revenue with the frozen value will be 41.9 million, and we no longer are able to commit money from fund balance. Our debt service fund summary does show that we're going to meet policy requirements for this fund. We now have our debt by type showing the 2023 bond authorization for the year, and the 23-24 year is indicated with a blue star. So we'll see those 2023 bond packages increasing over the next few years through the CIP process. Our debt to assessed value continues to trend downwards. We'll see a brief increase in 2025, 2026, but should continue to be going down. The light blue line is the tax-backed debt to AV with the TERS debt included, and the dark blue line is without the TERS debt. Our internal service funds, we implemented the motor pool in 2019 and the facilities in the IT fund in fiscal year 23. We've gone from 0% of vehicles covered by lease fees to an estimated 42% covered at the end of fiscal year 24. And the CHERS Broadway allocation money in the motor pool fund balance is being utilized to fund the general fund vehicle replacements for fiscal year 25, the 2 new police cars associated with the police officers, and replacements of up to 3 fire heavy apparatus in fiscal year 24. In fiscal year 24, we restored the general fund lease payments to the motor pool based on the updated replacement criteria. The internal service fund supplementals include replacement vehicles for general fund, approximately $500,000. The enterprise fund replacement vehicles are $1.07 million, and this replaces all vehicles that meet replacement criteria for the enterprise fund. And our 3 fire heavy apparatus replacements are approximately $4.5 million. Additionally, we are funding phase 2 generator heater enclosures for $144,000 and the IT switches for $275,000. We were not able to implement any capital lease fees for the IT or the facilities fund in fiscal year 24. The special revenue funds are shown here, all of them, their proposed beginning and ending fund balance and any budgeted expenditures. Our Convention and Visitors Bureau Fund has a supplemental for $586,000 for the funding of additional restrooms at Centennial Park, and this will be done through a CIP process, and it is contingent on meeting the requirements to host 10 regional, state, or national championship sporting event activity in the prior year, and we do expect to meet that milestone by the end of calendar year 2023, and revenue will be monitored over the next 5 years to ensure that requirements are met. The Drainage Maintenance Fund in fiscal year 24 includes the onboarding of a stormwater inspector necessary to meet several requirements, including inspecting the city's drainage system and 326 detention facilities and ensuring compliance with the TCEQ permit requirements. Component units include the PEDC, and all expenditures are consistent with the Pearland Prosperity Plan. Expenditures include direct business incentives of $2.2 million, additional expenditures related to capital improvements for Lower Kirby, State Highway 35, and a detention expansion, and it does include their drainage maintenance transfer of $32,400 annually. Are also contributing towards the Old Town Master Plan, $350,000. And I'll turn it back over to council for any questions.
There we go. Open it up for questions, comments from council. Mr. Berry?
Thanks, Mayor. Just for a quick question, on page 50, there's a tree trust at $1 million. We're spending $437,500 in expenses this year. What's that for?
So the $437,000, there's very limited things you can spend the tree trust money on. It's just fee we assess. It has to maintain the tree canopy, so they are working towards spending down their fund balance. This is year 2 of a program that started in fiscal year 23. It's a lot of rehabilitation of like the edible fruit trail. And I can get back to you on more detail about what's all
Rachel,
included in
do they replace trees that have been, like, I know, for example, up and down Pearland Parkway, a lot of the trees that were planted in the parkway were paid for out of the trust from people up and down, the Pearland Parkway that paid into it. Do they pay for the replacements when one is hit, damaged, taken down?
I believe they have in the past. I'm not 100% sure if that's covered by this part of the program that's proposed for 24. Do we have anyone here that's got background on that?
I was just more curious about where the money went and kind of what the goal was.
Yes, sir, you're correct. We can visit with Jerry Bradshaw, the urban forester, to get more detail on it, but a portion of it will go to the replacement of damaged trees.
Gotta put heads in bed. Mr. Camcar.
Thank you, sir. Can we go back to that list, that listed item on the
one?
funds? One, there you go. Can we talk about what's going on in Fund 305, the hotel motel tax? What is the big expenditures there for the year?
So the big expenditure there is the restroom in Centennial Park.
So that's a 500,000 item, and then
Right.
the other 1.2 staff, is that?
So it's going to be staff and then their operating budget. And then also the lease on their office space.
And aren't we going to talk about that later this year? Kind of what our plan is with the 7.2 balance? Wasn't that one of those things that, I can't remember if it was the last meeting that we had with the PDC?
Right. So we had some recent meetings with some of the folks in that arena to try to understand, what our options are and parameters are on being able to spend those dollars. Like with the softball tournaments, we've reached that threshold where we think we can start doing some of those type of improvements. We're going to look for more of those opportunities as well. And then, I think we can start to formulate a plan of how we utilize those dollars. There's also, if there's the desire to move forward with some part of a mixed use type project, there's dollars there for that purpose as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, in addition to that, I know we're kicking off the arts culture master plan that's coming up as well. So it's going to, end with something, hopefully in there as well. So I think over the next year, I think we're going to see, more need for it.
Trent, on the CVB money, can we build a location for them instead of leasing?
I think we could, obviously. I think we'd have to weigh that, where would that be, or, what would it look like, and would it be located, where it's advantageous for them. I think, being in the town center has its advantages for that. But we could look, if there's a desire to look at that, we can.
I'm just curious because it's so
Yeah.
restricted on what you can do. If we're able to eliminate a lease and
Yeah.
because that fund balance just keeps growing, that's one place to park some of those.
Yeah, and I don't know, Tracy, is that a use that we could make, versus paying a lease?
If a new building space included a visitor center as part of the design, that would be an allowable use.
Could we include a museum too?
A museum, as part of historic preservation
Yeah.
expense, would have to have the ability to draw visitors to it, and that's the challenge that we've had.
But what if the
with the
visitor
depot
center is in it as well?
It needs to be, if you're talking about the depot itself, the challenge with where the depot is located.
Not the
is that it
depot, but I'm just.
No, a freestanding building.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I thought you mentioned historic preservation.
Well, yeah, but we've got the Pearland Historical Society has a small museum. I think there's a lot of Pearland that could be, showcased and highlighted in a small museum that could bring people in and learn about Mark Belt.
So I think what I would suggest, and we had this as part of the write-up in the question from last meeting about what types of expenses can CVB pay for, is that we conduct a comprehensive workshop to really walk through what the parameters are and what we can and can't do, so that we can take the discussion and input from that meeting and develop, like a 5-year plan for CVB dollars. So we can try to answer anything we can here tonight, but I think there's, taking that approach will give us some more time to really kind of hash through what we can do, what we can't do, and then what the desires are, and then how we put that into a 5-year plan.
Put their office and the visitor center in Old Town. When we fix it up, it'll be beautiful.
Too many trees.
We're off the rails. Next.
Never too many trees.
Anybody else have a question on this portion of the? Seeing none, Trent, we'll keep going.
Enterprise fund or water sewer operations is 81.4 million in expenditures for fiscal year 24. This combines both our operations and our debt service fund. The enterprise debt fund expenditure growth is primarily driven by our CIP projects, including the surface water treatment plant phase 1, surface water treatment plant phase 2A, which is projected to start in fiscal year 26, the JHEC facility expansion, the Bailey water plant, the Berry Rose reclamation facility replacement, and also the Longwood decommissioning. These critical CIP projects have been planned for. They've been included in our prior CIPs and will continue to be in our CIP going forward. They're required to meet different state permitting requirements for system capacity. All of these projects have been approved by council multiple times through the CIP adoption, the intent to reimburse process, and also debt issuances. We include these projects and their O&M component in our rate model, and they are continuously shown through our CIP and multi-year projections. The FY24 proposed budget includes a 14% rate increase, which will have an approximately $12.40 increase for households using 6,000 gallons of water per month. The history of rate increases in Pearland is shown here. We started in fiscal year 2022 with a 5% increase and have generally increased since then. The fiscal year 24 increase is 14%, which is below the 16% that was projected last year during this process. The sample bills for a 14% increase are shown here for different residential usage and meter sizes. Again, the average increase for a resident using 6,000 gallons of water is $12.40. A comparison bill of the residential 5/8 meter using 6,000 gallons of water to some of our neighboring communities is shown here. Pearland continues to be in the middle of that range, whereas the comparison bills for commercial restaurant properties do indicate that Pearland water rates are at the higher end compared to cities around us. The enterprise operating fund budget is a $5.9 million increase from the fiscal year adopted budget of $66.5, and the enterprise debt fund includes the transfer to the enterprise debt fund from the operations fund, and it has increased by $2.2 million. So what does Pearland need to do to meet its bond coverage ratio? The FY24 proposed budget is compliant with the bond ratio of 1.15. Our revenues over and operating expenditures exceed our current debt obligations. Additionally, the enterprise operating fund must maintain a reserve of 15%. That is being met. Reserves are projected to decrease to 26% by the end of fiscal year 24, and any revenue increase lower than 14% will increase the amount of reserves being used. The FY25 ending fund balance is projected to be 16%. So going forward, the driver for any rate changes will be both the bond ratio and the fund balance. And once reserves hit 15%, no additional withdrawals will be made. This shows the enterprise fund operating statement for fiscal year 24. Shows the bond coverages and the reserves are being met. And this is the enterprise debt fund income statement, which is similar. Those transfers are the transfers from the operating fund. Our rate model does show the 14% projected increase for fiscal year 24 and a 17% increase for fiscal year 25 and 26. These rate increases have also decreased from prior year models. So the increases in expenditures for the debt or for the enterprise operating fund not related to debt include a full year of surface water plant operations. It includes staff, water, and chemical purchases and is a $1 million increase. We have a contribution to the Gulf Coast Water Authority Shannon Water Pump Project that is an additional $458,000. Our vehicle replacements were increased from $250,000 in fiscal year 23 to 1.1 million this year, and this does replace all vehicles that meet the eligibility criteria for the enterprise fund. Our transfer in for mud rebates from the enterprise operating fund to the tax-backed debt service fund is 1.2 million. Our risk fund transfer increased by 632,000. And our EPW Utilities Administration split included 3 new positions for about 378,000, and the general salary and wages changes due to full year staffing, market changes, and the steps are 400,000. The supplementals included in the enterprise fund include a management assistant and business administrator for utilities administration, as well as an environmental health and safety coordinator, as well as $50,000 for a Pearland Water asset management consultant. The impact fees are we transferred from the impact fee funds to the enterprise debt service fund, and it pays for the debt service payments for projects that relate to impact fees. And the water sewer impact fee transfers to the enterprise debt service fund are $6.7 million for fiscal year 24. So at this time, we'll take any questions on enterprise fund.
Mayor.
Ms. Cade?
Rachel, can you go back to slide 72? Did you call the thing for the Gulf Coast Water Authority Shannon Water Pump a donation?
No, it's not a donation. It's a contribution that we're required to make.
Contribution and donation are kind of synonyms, but
well, it's our
something
portion
we're-
of
It's
their.
our-
but we're required to make it.
It's our
Okay.
contractual obligation.
And if transfer for mud rebates, okay, never mind. So that's the only thing I needed to ask you. Thank you.
Questions, comments? Mr. Hernandez?
If it's okay, Mayor, back up. I forgot to ask a question I wanted to previously. Maybe I'll lead in related to this also. Dang it. First, I appreciate the answer on the long-term planning for the rate as far as the drought conditions. So that was helpful. But does that have, I meant to ask, does that have any impact on I know we've been pretty aggressive with our I&I program. Does drought have any impact on that?
So maybe I'll let Mr. Sans weigh in on that, but I think when we see things moving around as we do in a drought, it's going to impact the water is easy to know the damage there because you're under pressure and you have a water leak. When you're dealing with a gravity system, you're probably having a lot of things move around as well that causes some exacerbation of your I&I, but those things are not as readily apparent. I don't know, David, if you got any other thoughts on drought and increasing your I&I issues?
Councilor and Mayor, excuse my voice. I'm just getting over a case of bronchitis. But as far as the immediate impact from the drought on I&I, it actually is reduced because you're not having the rain, which is where the infiltration and inflow comes from. But you're also having damage to the pipelines with the shifting in soil going from wet to dry, which could definitely impact and increase the I&I.
And that is my question. It's kind of long term. I didn't want to lose any of the impact that we've made with the program thus far, and just trying to be proactive and thinking about, the future. So I was just curious if we need to maybe elevate that in the discussion a little bit. Maybe not now, but
Sure. I think, we continue with our dollars that are allocated to the I&I program. And, we'll continue to monitor the plants and what we see. And as we move into, updating our modeling efforts for water and wastewater, typically what we'll do is we'll put some flow meters at some of the lift stations and in different parts of the system where based on the plant, what's flowing through the plant, we know we have I&I issues. Then as you start to look at those flow meters in the system, you can start to pinpoint what areas you've got that kind of thing. It's the
'cause
same,
that is
same
my-
thing we've
my
done in the past. We'll
concern is,
continue
once
to do
the
that.
rain returns, the rain usually.
Now we got
returns
a bunch of new holes in the system.
Yeah, big numbers, and so I
So-
don't want we're doing all this, expansions and stuff like that. So I don't want our plants to.
While I'm sure it does cause some additional damage, that your gravity lines are much deeper, so I don't know that there's affected as much by the expansive soil range. We deal with expansive soils around here, but there's a zone where once you're below that, they're not as impactful. So most of our deep sanitary lines probably aren't as affected. Now the manholes and things like that, we probably see a lot of soil movement around those. But I think in the past, we haven't seen just like this in past droughts. We haven't seen like this huge uptick in I&I issues.
It would be interesting to know, when the age of some of the water main breaks. Be interesting to know the age of some of those water lines, because because obviously newer technology, newer piping. We use a lot of stabilized sand now versus.
I think we're typically going to see those on our I know we're going to see more on our transite water lines, which we've got a program for replacing those as well. But
I think it's a good question, and again, we had a drought in 2011. We had some drought conditions, not quite as bad as this year. Last year early, and then here we are again. I'll say it just like I did in 2011. We won't see the effects of the drought for several years because it's subsoil, it's subterranean. We have to wait till something breaks to know it.
It's so bad right now. We're seeing it on the asphalt streets right now. It's happening quickly.
It's happened very quickly, and the asphalt streets you can see it a lot quicker because you can actually see what the subgrade's doing because of what the surface is doing. But I don't know that we'll know for some time. Really.
Yeah, and I just don't know enough about what we can do proactively, so that's why I asked the question. Now for my non-germane question, going back, this is just, when was it changed that the $0 committed from fund balance, the new state worksheet, is that like new, or is that previous as well? When did that change occur? What was the rationale?
It's not under the enterprise, it's under the debt.
Yeah, this is my non-germane.
What was the question?
For the debt service rate, it's whatever page it is.
It's
47 or 46 of 81.
Was that after the news?
It's right before the enterprise fund.
Yeah. So when the tax worksheets changed, when the law changed with Senate Bill 2, House Bill 2, somebody help me.
Senate Bill 2. That's me.
When it changed a couple of sessions ago, then I think we did that for like the next year. But the way the tax is that the part where the tax rate now works, the way it works with the collection rate and things like that you kind of eliminate those pieces? Keep going back.
It's 42. One more. There you go.
$0 committed from fund balance, new state worksheet formula removes that need or possibility.
Yeah.
That's what he's asking about. What does that mean?
So I'll try, and then I'm going to rely on Rachel.
I feel like we're all asking like really
clean
tough
up for
questions.
me.
Wow.
Is in the way the old tax worksheets worked, is that you wound up with over, it wasn't even over policy fund balance. I think you could commit funds from that to bringing down your debt service rate, and was it kind of based in the frozen values again, or was that something else? Okay, it was frozen value. Yeah, so
Are they?
you
Do you
committed
think
your
the
fund balance to
rationale
bring the
is
rate
to,
down, and the way it works now, you can't do that.
right? So is the rationale to what member Kamkar maybe has alluded to a couple times to try to get cities to stop forced saving? Is that what you think it is? I'm just kind of curious what the rationale is.
I think the rationale is when you go to the voters or you decide to sell debt, that you're spending that debt on what you've promised the voters you'll spend that on. You're not sitting there with a big fund balance.
Okay, got it. Interesting. All right, thank you, Mayor.
Mr. Camcar?
Thank you, sir. Can I go to slide 68? The presentation. Yeah, that's the one. Great. To understand the where we're going on the water rate, the increase in 14%, is the item on the first bullet driving that, which is maintaining a ratio to capital spend?
Right now, what's driving it is that bond ratio, the 1.15, but going into future years, it's going to be driven more by the cash reserves
So if we go back, I think one slide.
to the right.
Okay,
model.
so there's two things we have to do to meet our requirements, and one of them is the bond coverage ratio, which is the 1.15, and we're hitting at 1.16 with this budget. And then the next slide, this is this is where we have to maintain a reserve of 15% of total expenses. So then if we go forward a few slides, right there, go back one. So, okay, go forward to the rate model, actually. Couple of slides to the rate model. Okay, so you can see it here on the rate model. If you look at the column for FY24, and then we've got highlighted in yellow, the bond coverage, we're at 1.16. And if you look down below there, we're at 26% on the unreserved working capital ending cash, which that threshold is 15%. So you have to meet both of those. So if you look at moving forward in FY25, we're now at 1.57 on that 1.15 requirement, but we're at 16%, just barely over the 15% requirement for the second requirement. So we got to hit both those. So you can see this year what's driving it is the bond coverage ratio, and in future years it's the other metric.
Brain's not thinking as fast as yours. So we're bond coverage ratio, we're spending more, we're finishing out the water plant. And so to meet that ratio, we need to be at this larger number. But in years going forward, we need to produce that 15%. Because if I remember in our last meeting,
Correct.
I thought that this year was driven by meeting the cash reserve. Maybe that was different, but I want to say it was what we talked about in March or February. I just trying to keep the thread of that thought. So next year, the 17% is strictly driven by having to have enough quote unquote cash in the bank.
I mean, that's the thing that's driving where we have to set the rates at. Yes.
Got it. And then does the items in the 17s and 25, 26, and then drops to 11 and 27, does that presuppose the other $500 million in improvements that we have in the on the CIP?
It includes all those projects we went through and all the other projects that are in the 5-year CIP.
Right, and then can we go to slide 73? I guess 2 down from here. I don't know. I haven't seen these postings. I don't know exactly what these folks do. But can we just talk a little about the 115,000 and I guess the coordination on the health and safety? I know we had Miss Nancy. I love Miss Nancy. She's been doing a very good job. How does she relate to her position, and what is this person doing for $116,000 a year?
So that's fully loaded. So that's benefits and everything. And so Nancy is over in our utility billing group.
Got it.
This is all our water and sewer operational group under Mr. Sanz. So this was all under one umbrella with engineering and public works and utilities until recently, until this past year when we split the two departments out. And so part of that was evaluating the administrative staff we had serving basically all of that group, and how to split that up and how to serve both groups. And as we separated the two groups, we saw where we had some shortcomings in the ability to handle the number of contracts, the number of types of projects that are going on and the initiatives. So that's where, you know, the management assistant comes in. The business administrator is going to handle the business end, which is all the contracts and the purchase orders and the making sure everything's paid for over in that group. The environmental health and safety coordinator was identified very early on by Mr. Sanz from a standpoint of that we don't have a robust, proactive safety program, as well as making sure we're relying on our superintendents to do all the TCEQ permitting and all the requirements along with those. And so it's to help out on that end of it as well. And so these are just the top priorities he identified within the organization moving forward, where we had big holes and we couldn't fill those with our existing spots as we split engineering and public works off and utilities off from each other.
We have somebody who did this job last year.
What's that?
Had somebody on the staff who did this job last year.
We had people when it was one department that were handling these things to some extent. I've got a nice write-up from Mr. Sanz on his assessment of the department and the needs. I plan on sharing with the council. I just have not been able to get to his final version of that to share that out. We can share that out. It's got more details on you know, his assessment and the basis of these needs. But we knew going into splitting up the two departments that we would you know, have some things we would need to do on the utility side.
Would help. I have brain damage that somebody was doing this job last year, and then we're going to put $200,000 more into a department that somebody was doing that function last year. I understand departments change, but I mean, we're not asking for a 1% increase in the water rate.
Sure. I think the short of it is that we may have been doing these things, but not very well for both engineering and public works, or engineering, public works, and utilities. And this gets the utility side of things to a point where they can do these things very well.
I'm very thankful for that, by the way. So I know I asked for this several years, so I appreciate you making this switch.
I would argue if the job was being completely done. The way I would argue it.
Disagree, but we could pay an outside consultant. We could have an additional part-time staffer. I mean, this is $200,000 that's never going to come off the payroll. And it's a philosophical idea.
Sure.
Do we want a consultant that does 15 hours of accounting, or do we want a full-timer? There's going to be times when that person's going to work overtime and we need them for 50 hours a week. There's going to be times that we need them for 15. And that's just,
This group probably runs more supply and contracts than any other group in the city, and they've got to make sure those get bid out. They got to make sure the material's ordered. They got to make sure when it gets here that we account for it, that it's in the right place, that it gets paid for, and it's a hole right now.
Love to see the memo. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
Just wanted to say thank y'all. Rachel, I'm sorry if I sounded smart aleck a while ago. I didn't mean it.
Mayor, last thing. Y'all were gonna get the numbers for commercial versus residential property tax values. I know you said in your memo earlier that y'all were still working on that, so you're gonna shoot them an email out later?
Yes, we will definitely have that information in the next memo.
Okay. Thank you.
I say definitely. I'm assuming we get all the information and put it together, but yes, you will get it when we get it.
All right, moving on.
Want to walk through this? Okay. So next up is we do have a tentative budget discussion number 3 on August 28th. I didn't hear a whole lot of questions or any significant things we need to cover again in a presentation like this. So my thought is we'll do a memo to answer any of the questions from tonight, and then we can use some of that time to preview the CIP, because it's been a while since we did the CIP workshop, and then we can take the time to do that, because we do have the CIP budget for adoption coming up on the 11th. So we've got the CIP budget coming up for adoption on the 11th. So we'll probably focus a little more on that. But if there's any questions or anything on this that you feel like we haven't answered or need to answer, we can talk about it on the 28th as well. And then we'll follow that with the CIP budget on September 11th, as well as the public hearing for the budget, and then the first reading of the budget and the first reading of the tax rate. And then on September 25th, we'll come back with the public hearing for the tax rate, and then the second reading for the budget and second reading for the tax rate to close out the year. So that's
Very
the
good.
schedule looking forward.
I'll just say this to the entire staff. I know we've got a lot of department heads that put a lot of time and effort into the budget, but we have many other people within those departments that do it as well. So it's always a little stressful around budget time because it's a kind of a moving target here for about 6 weeks. But once we get our budget in place, we move on and our city moves on. So I want to thank everybody, not just those that are in the room here, but anybody that may be watching in that's a member of our staff that puts time and effort into the budget. It's a good discussion. It's needed. It's part of what we do. It's the transparency with our budget and finance. And so I thank each one of you. And I've said it often, we are not successful as a city except for the work that our staff does. We can sit up here and talk all we want, but the work day in, day out, the calls to citizens, the reactions to citizens, the interactions out on the streets and everywhere else is done by city staff. Somebody that's got the logo, somewhere on their clothing or their car or whatever. And you guys are what make this place tick. So I want to thank each one of you for the work that you do every day, but especially during this time, it does get stressful. You've got your normal everyday component of what you're doing, but then we've got budget on top of that. So I want to thank everybody for that. Last wrap-up comments, questions, council? All right, seeing that, we will move towards adjournment at 8:27. We got it.